This is Frank and his girlfriend Mieke. A couple of months ago, I put out a call for people like Frank who had just completed their first ever composition. And Frank was one of the people who responded. Now, taking that first step as a composer requires a fair amount of self-belief, especially if, like Frank, you're trying to impress your girlfriend.
My name's Frank. I'm 23 years old. I'm Dutch, so I live in the Netherlands, in Leiden. I study astronomy. I'm a master's student. I'm doing astronomy research, so about planets and all that. But I've been interested in music basically all my life, and since I was about 18, I wrote music. And this piece I wrote is actually for my girlfriend. I wrote it for our 1-year anniversary, I think. And it was supposed to be this cutesy piece, kind of like a Pixar Ratatouille kind of vibe.
So Frank had written his piece, and by all accounts, Mieke loved it. But Frank was aware that he was just starting out as a composer, and he really wanted to improve. So today we're going to look through his piece and see if we can work out what to do to take Frank's love song to another level. I'm going to use all Frank's material but rewrite it completely. We'll talk through the changes I've made, and at the end we'll see what Mieke herself thinks of the new version.
So even through the door I could hear you scream.
I'd like to think that over the years I've become quite good at spotting the potential in these kind of pieces. And my aim here really is to show that in a beginner's composition the musical idea itself is often really good, and all it needs is a little polishing and finessing to turn it into something truly impressive.
I have about 8 hours of storage space, so we should be fine. I think my audio's going, my video's going, my mic's set up, so...
Are you feeling nervous?
Yeah, no, I'm very curious about what you've done.
Okay, so at this point I played Frank the computer MIDI recording, and I was going to play that to you as well. But in the end we managed to find a group to record both of these pieces live for us at the Royal College of Music in London. I'll explain later how that came about and how Frank ended up being there in person to hear his first ever composition performed live by real musicians. It's Frank.
Hi.
Suffice to say it was a pretty exciting day for him. So here's what his original first ever composition sounded like when it was performed live. So first of all, I just love the piece. I mean, it's so sweet and cute. I could totally hear the Pixar Ratatouille thing. I really can feel that in it. I just love the tone of it. And before we start, I wanted to say, you might not realise it, but you're actually really lucky to have such a clear reason and motivation to write. You know, when as composers, we don't always know the feeling or the atmosphere that we're trying to create. You know, sometimes we might be focusing on a particular technical issue rather than a specific emotion or idea. But when you have a specific idea like this, it can sometimes really help narrow down your compositional choices.
I can remember that the main melody, I almost got that as a present, and then the other parts, I thought of them around that with the idea of it having to be about a romantic thing.
I mean, as an example of how useful it is to have some kind of idea or concept in mind, when I was reworking your piece, what I was doing seemed to be trying to push me into a sort of darker direction at one point.
Oh no.
But then I realised that's not what we were after. We were trying to keep this sweet tone we were aiming at. So that helped me keep it back on track where we were going with it. So to give everyone watching their bearings, I've labelled the sections of the piece. It's basically 4 sections. You've got an A section that repeats, a B section that repeats, a C section that repeats, and then back to an A section which repeats. So let's start from the beginning and I'll talk you through some of the changes. And I've got 10 main ideas to talk about.
Perfect.
And of course, I'm not saying this is what you should have done. I'm just pointing out some of the thought processes you might have to develop an idea like this and take it to the next level. So the first idea I had for you was to hold stuff back. Or as my old teacher used to put it, don't show your hand too early in the game. Think of a piece a bit like a story. A good story will hold our interest by having revelations, interesting new scenes, and by not introducing all of the characters all at the same time. And I think this is really the core thing you should think about, because you start out, as you said, with 4 instruments, with the whole registral space from top to bottom filled out, and then you stay with that texture throughout. So I think we need to hold some of these things back to keep the interest later on. Oh, and I should say, by the way, just because we've got 4 instruments doesn't mean we only have 4 characters. You could say that each instrument contains within it a whole family of different characters. You've got the high flute, the low flute, the middle flute, but then there's even the staccato flute, the legato flute, and so on. And each one of those sounds can feel like a new character entering the story, so treat them like that and make sure that when you do introduce a new character, it's for a good reason.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
So here's my version of the beginning of the piece. You've got the copy of the score there, right?
Yes, I have it here completely unlooked at.
Time to open it up.
All right, I can't wait.
I grant you permission.
Thank you. It's like a present.
So let's plunge straight in. And you can see here at the beginning, I decided straight away to make us wait for the arrival of the tune itself. So I added an extra 16 bars at the start, and I just copied across your accompaniment. But you'll notice that I marked it all very quietly and I jammed it all in close register all together in the middle. So then when the tune finally arrives up in the high flute, it feels like a significant moment.
That makes sense.
But I did decide to try and keep a little interest going by passing the accompanying figures around the different instruments. So already in the first 16 bars, everyone's had a little go at this background melody. And I think that gives us a nice flavour of our ensemble, while still really holding back most of the juiciest sounds we've got available to us. So then the flute comes in at that point, and if you have a new instrument taking over the main line like the flute here, it can be an idea to have a little scale or a run into it, just to draw the ear towards the new instrument.
I think that's very difficult to kind of draw the attention to different parts of the music and have the attention shift around from instrument to instrument.
It's almost like giving a little help to the listener, a little pointer. This is where it's going to be coming now.
Yeah.
Just put your attention on this bit now.
True, yeah.
And here's a similar example. After 8 bars, I decided to pass the main line over to the oboe, and I gave it this 2-note lead-in just to guide the ear toward the new instrument. This then led me to explore adding some variation to the melody. I could feel the melody wanting to jump back up to that high D that I'd used. That really felt like it sort of spoke to me at that point. I could just hear that going back up to that D.
I guess it's very sing-song at...
Yeah, it's almost like yodeling.
Right, yeah.
And then I moved your accompaniment up an octave, so the flute and the oboe overlap in register and seem to intertwine with each other. And I felt all of this heightened that same emotion that you were expressing. I think it adds to the yearning quality that we have in the piece.
That's very interesting. Yearning.
And I felt like the newly varied A section was interesting enough to warrant a repeat now. So I did that, but with a busier accompaniment the second time round. And again, this is to maintain the interest. Now, one thing I would say is that this piece, as you wrote it, has a very predictable pattern of 8 bars followed by 8 bars followed by 8 bars. But it's not just that. The harmony also moves at the same speed. It changes in a regular way. And each phrase ends exactly where we'd expect. And this can end up feeling a little bit tiring. It's like hearing somebody talking when you already know exactly what they're going to say.
Sure, yeah.
So keep your eyes open for opportunities to change things up. The stripy bits in this chart show you the bits that I've added. There was that 16-bar introduction. And then to build into the B section, I simply repeated the last 2 bars twice, just building the anticipation a little bit into the new section. But the largest change I made at this sort of structural level was the change from the B to the C section. This was where I really felt that the predictable 8-bar pattern was starting to get a bit tiring. So I actually did away with it altogether and instead allowed the music to kind of fade out and wind down into this little bassoon solo.
Oh, that's really interesting. I would have never thought of that.
I think it's really important sometimes to give music these kind of treading water moments where nothing much happens. Again, it's a good kind of storytelling so that when the C section finally does arrive, it feels like a new direction or a new beginning. And this was that area where I felt that things could have gone a bit darker. I felt like that bassoon solo could have twisted into a sort of darker, more chromatic place. But then I realised that we wanted it to stay in this overall positive tone, so I avoided it going in that direction and I pulled it back again.
Yeah, I would love to hear the darker version, by the way, at some point.
And notice how both of these structural changes I've made are at the joins between 2 sections. I often find that it's these kind of joins or transitions between 2 ideas that will require most of your attention as a composer. Don't be afraid of spending, hours working on a little section or poring over one of these moments just to get it just right. They're often very difficult, but they make a big difference and make the piece really start to come together when you get those right.
I guess, yeah.
Now, another thing is it's quite common when you're just starting out to feel the pressure of writing, proper chords, to feel that each bar has to change to a new recognizable chord, to have a kind of logic that you understand from music theory, that's you're doing everything as you're supposed to. But sometimes some of the most beautiful moments, I think, come from places where you, as the composer, don't fully understand the logic of what you've written. It's maybe even when you move away from knowing what you're doing that your own voice starts to emerge.
I mean, it sounds kind of strange and counterintuitive, but that actually does make a lot of sense.
And definitely keep your ears open for accidental discoveries. If you forget to transpose something or leave out an accidental sometime, it can lead to an unexpected kind of beauty. And if it does, then embrace it. Treat it like, a gift from the creative gods. Don't feel embarrassed that you didn't create it yourself. It just came to you. That's perfect. A tiny little example of that is the G here in the oboe. It feels like we're on a D major chord in this bar, so the most logical choice for the first note of the oboe would be an A. And it sounds fine, but I felt an intuition, without particularly thinking about the theoretical side, that I should keep the G from the previous bar. It just seemed more interesting, more expressive than a theoretically right note. I've I've come across this in guitar playing. You get some chords which are obviously just there because somebody once thought, I'll see what happens when my hand slides higher up. I think it's really important to think less about theories and more about being open to the joys of accident and fortune. Now, the next one is quite a big one for me. I think a lot about the ways to vary the overall register in a piece. So I mentioned how I started in the mid register. At the start of the B section, there's a really significant change in the register. We've been focused on the upper middle register, and then suddenly for the first time in the piece, I brought in the low bassoon and the clarinet, right down as low as it goes on the clarinet. It gets very juicy down there. At the same time, almost as a way of emphasizing the change, I pushed the oboe and the clarinet right up to the top of their range. But notice I didn't stay with that low register for too long. I felt like it would start to bog the piece down, so I ended up quickly returning to the middle register. I suppose thinking about register also makes you aware of the range of instrumental combinations you have. So your version uses all 4 instruments all the time. We've already seen that I carved out that bassoon solo, but then I also followed it with a moment with no flute at all. And then a section later with just clarinet and bassoon. And that not only changes the register, but it also freshens up the palette and gives a different perspective on the instruments that we're using. It adds to the changing scenery of the story and keeps it interesting. And still sticking with register, be aware sometimes of the overall direction register takes. The best example of that is just before the end. There's a quite subtle register rise in the oboe and bassoon. They just creep higher in their range, giving a sort of background sense of tension rising. And then the flute reaches a high G, just to give you a sense of culmination and completion. That's the highest note we hear in the whole piece. And it's worth pointing out that neither of these are particularly flashy. They don't make a point of their position. They just show you how changing register can help manipulate the emotions almost behind the scenes. Okay, now one of my favourite parts of your piece is the ending. The way it holds in that sort of suspended state at the end, it feels open-ended, and to me it sort of suggests that the relationship is going on and going to carry on into the future. So you can actually hear the metaphor that the music seems to be expressing. I don't know whether that's the way you thought about it.
Yeah, obviously. No, I just wanted to end it. No, by the way, the ending was one of the parts that I was most satisfied with too. So hearing you say that is really cool.
I mean, I just found it really very touching and much more interesting than if it was just, a standard major chord. And the point really is that be aware of, it sounds like you are already, but be aware of the metaphorical implications of the music, because it can create some of the most powerful effects in the listener. Not everyone will necessarily pick up on it, but for the people who do, it will definitely feel really powerful. And if the metaphor ties in with the overall meaning or theme of the piece, like it very much seems to here, then it will really seem like you're doing something, really deep and powerful to the listener.
Well, okay.
Now, part of the ending is that charming little upward phrase on the flute. It's really nice, but it does come a little bit out of nowhere. We didn't hear that particular phrase anywhere else in the piece, right?
No, true. I just felt like the flute needed to have one more moment.
So I felt like I loved the phrase itself, I really liked it, but that feeling of the fact that it came out of nowhere made me wonder, well, could we now go back and find somewhere earlier in the music where we could fit in that little phrase? And you remember we had that sort of bassoon solo section where the instruments faded out one by one to end up on the bassoon. So I had the idea at that point, what about if we add that little phrase as each instrument leaves? So they finish their phrase and then they end da-da-da.
Right.
And what that does is it kind of then integrates the phrase so that it feels more like it's part of the piece. So that when we hear it at the end, it now feels like it belongs to the piece. So yes, it's a sort of like you've gone through forwards in, moment by moment, but it's worth then checking in and finding whether you can, integrate things looking backwards at what you've already written. So in light of the stuff that you've now got at the end of the piece, can you find things that will make it seem even more powerful earlier in the piece?
Yeah.
So the final tip is then to take a step back and look at the overall balance of the elements. So taking a sort of step back from that whole piece and seeing how all the different elements of it balance out across the whole piece. And that might be the register, the sort of change of pace of the harmony, how the instruments are used. I realised that at this point that the clarinet didn't at this moment have a very prominent solo, so I added one here. And I also saved the busiest texture for the very climax of that piece. It's at the sort of fairly typical golden section just a little bit before the end. There's a full register range and a full texture and some of the most intricate rhythmic writing that I did. But because we're still after this cute overall tone, I did then also bring it straight back down and lead into the ending that you'd already written.
All right.
So that's it. Here, let's have a listen.
All right. I can't wait.
So now I'm gonna email it you because I didn't trust you not to listen to it. Everything's all right.
Wait, actually, let me before you say that, my girlfriend just texted asking if she can come to my room.
Oh yeah, of course. Would she like to?
I think so.
React
Yeah.
as well?
Yeah, she's on her way now. So I want you to meet someone.
Oh god. Hi.
Hi. So
Hiya.
this is Mieke.
Hello.
Hi.
Great to
I
meet
heard a
you.
lot about you.
Well, you're lucky to have such a wonderful composer writing you beautiful melodies.
Aw.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Oh yes.
Did you enjoy working on it?
I loved it. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
All right.
That's so nice. That's so nice. I mean, I'm sure you make a lot of people very happy by investing time in, what they made. So
Well, we're about to find out.
yeah, or not.
Okay, so at this point I need to break in once again and explain what happened and how Frank ended up coming to London. I played the computer MIDI version of my reworking, first to Frank and then to Mieke. But having done our Zoom chat, I then decided it was really worth seeing if we could get a group together to play both versions. I put out a call on my social media accounts and very quickly got a response from Aeolian Winds, who are currently studying at my old college, the Royal College of Music. They said they'd found a room and were able to get together in college just a couple of days later. I told Frank the good news, and to my surprise he said, "Right, I'm getting on a plane." And suddenly there we were at college, literally fulfilling Frank's dreams, getting trained musicians to play his first ever composition. It was honestly delightful to see how excited Frank was to be, as he put it, somewhere where people spend all day thinking about nothing but music. He absolutely loved it. So thanks so much to Aeolian Winds, and here's the full performance of my version of Frank's piece, followed by a few reactions from both Frank and of course Mieke. And finally we'll hear from Frank straight after he heard his own music being performed live for the first time. As always, I'd like to thank my patrons on Patreon for helping secure the time and resources it takes to make a video like this. If you want to make more videos like this possible, or if you want a PDF or MP3 of the piece, please consider supporting the channel over at Patreon.
Wow. Wow, it's insane.
Oh, it's so much more dynamical or something. There's obviously there's so much more happening. I loved it. I really did. It's I could listen to it again and again.
It feels the same, but then still different, and
I know, right?
so cool.
It's got all of the cutesiness, I think, but it's also got a bit of tension at some point and a lot more a build up and several kind of climactic moments, and then the bassoon solo, which completely unexpected.
With your song, it sounds more like more is going on. Do you know what I mean? And no. It's like
in this version, right?
Yeah. In this version, yeah. Okay, cool.
I think this really goes to show what you can do with instruments instead of just transcribing it from piano to 4 instruments and adding some layers, but really using instruments to, tell their own stories within a story.
Did you enjoy that?
Well, it was spectacular. It was so strange to be there and in a building like this with all of everything around it, and to have people who are so professional and play something that you wrote in your room unbeknownst, having no clue, and they played it so well, and I had no idea it could sound like this.
Would you have written it differently? You'd have known it was going to be played here.
I might have given them some space to breathe. I didn't know that was going to be a problem, only from this, there's so much to learn and new things to put in the recording or in the score. So this was an experience I'll be trying to kind of process over the coming year, probably.
Welcome to the world of composition.
Thank you. Thank you.